What if Canada didn't rely on just one defense partner anymore? This doesn't mean leaving NATO or abandoning NORAD, contrary to what Pete Huckster would have us believe. It would mean giving Canada more options. Recently, the idea of Canada joining an EU defense program no longer sounds far-fetched. There's a clear reason for that shift, and it deserves serious attention. I'm your host, Pierre Shields, and this is North of MAGA. Let's take a look. Context. For decades, Canada's defense strategy was straightforward. Canada relied on NATO for collective security, NORAD for continental defense with the United States, and American suppliers for most major military systems. This approach worked when trust was strong and rules were predictable. Today, that environment has changed. Kind of an understatement. Canada has faced increasing trade pressure, tariff threats, and rhetoric that openly questions Canadian sovereignty. At the same time, Europe itself has changed. The European Union is no longer only an economic bloc. It's actively developing its own defense capabilities, and Canada has begun to take notice. What people get wrong about EU defense. When people hear the phrase EU defense, many assume it refers to a European army. That assumption is wrong. EU defense initiatives are project-based, voluntary, and focused on industrial cooperation. Countries choose which capabilities they want to participate in. Crucially, several of these programs already allow participation from non-EU partners. Canada would not be joining the European Union itself. Canada would be participating in specific defense projects. What EU defense programs actually include. There are three core elements of EU defense cooperation that are worth understanding because none of them resemble a traditional army. The first is permanent structured cooperation, commonly known as PESCO. PESCO is not a single military force. It's a framework that allows participating countries to jointly develop specific military capabilities they actually need. These projects range from unmanned systems and drone platforms to cyber defense, secure communication, logistics, medical support, and cold weather operations. Some projects focus on Arctic logistics and mobility. Others concentrate on resilience against cyber attacks, space-based surveillance, and interoperability between allied forces. The key point is that participation is voluntary. Countries aren't forced into projects they don't want. They choose capabilities that align with their national interests and geography. For Canada, that alignment is obvious. Cold environments, long distances, logistics in harsh conditions, and sovereignty operations all match Canadian defense realities. The second major pillar is the European Defence Fund, or EDF. This is where EU defense stops being theoretical and becomes material. The European Defence Fund provides real money for defense research, development, and pre-production systems. Instead of each country developing expensive systems on its own, the EDF encourages shared R&D, shared technology, and shared industrial participation. Companies across partner nations collaborate on sensors, software, materials, propulsion systems, artificial intelligence, and cyber capabilities. This model is important for Canada because it emphasizes co-development rather than simple off-the-shelf purchases. It prioritizes shared intellectual property, domestic industrial participation, and supply chain resilience. In other words, it's not just about buying equipment, it's about building long-term industrial capacity. The third element is military mobility. Military mobility focuses on the less glamorous, but absolutely critical ability to move forces, equipment, and supplies quickly during a crisis. This includes infrastructure compatibility, transport corridors, regulatory alignment, and logistics coordination. Modern conflicts are won as much by logistics as by hardware. Being able to move the right equipment to the right place at the right time is often decisive. For Canada, military mobility cooperation connects directly to Arctic readiness, northern infrastructure, and rapid response capabilities. What matters most is that none of these initiatives are theoretical. They already exist. They're already funded, and they continue to expand as Europe takes a more serious role in its own defense. This is not about creating a rival to NATO. It's about increasing capability, resilience, and options within the existing alliance framework. Why this matters for Canada. This discussion is not ideological, it's practical. First, participating in EU defense programs would strengthen Canada's strategic autonomy. Canada currently relies heavily on a single partner for military procurement and defense decisions. More partners means greater leverage and independence. Second, European defense cooperation emphasizes joint production, shared intellectual property, and domestic industrial participation. That approach creates high-value jobs inside Canada instead of exporting entire supply chains. Third, there's a strong Arctic alignment. Nordic countries understand cold environments, long distances, logistics challenges, and sovereignty concerns. Those realities directly match Canada's defense needs. Finally, defense policy is also industrial policy. Strong domestic industry translates into long-term national power and resilience. NATO and NORAD, clearing the confusion. It's important to be clear about what this would not replace. EU defense cooperation would not replace NATO, it wouldn't replace NORAD. Instead, it would complement both. NATO already includes EU and non-EU members, and EU defense initiatives are designed to strengthen European capacity within NATO. Canada having more options doesn't weaken alliances. It strengthens Canada's position within them. Political reality. This type of cooperation won't happen overnight. However, several realistic steps are already possible. Canada could pursue observer status in selected programs. It could participate in joint research and development projects. It could focus on Arctic logistics and cyber defense initiatives. Politically, the conversation has shifted. When a country faces economic coercion from its closest partner, it naturally begins exploring alternatives. That approach is not anti-American. It's fundamentally pro-Canadian. Takeaway. Canada doesn't need to choose between the United States and Europe. Canada can and should work with both. Participation in EU defense programs wouldn't signal a rupture. It would signal diversification, resilience, and sovereignty. If you want serious Canadian defense analysis that avoids imported talking points, consider subscribing to North of MAGA. It really helps me out. Leave a comment and tell me what you think. Should Canada deepen defense ties with Europe or continue relying primarily on the United States? I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is going to be. I'm Peter Shields for North of MAGA. Come see my merch and go play outside.